Hi, I'm Pinky Van Leer, and I'm delighted to be exploring the mind of Dr. Howard Rubin, a revered analyst on IT digital economics. Dr. Rubin, you're both the progenitor and world's leading thinker on IT digital economics, which is a completely new domain. Can you explain what that is and why it matters?
First, thank you so much for those very kind words. And the issue of why it matters, I think, is just really, really critical. I mean, the world spends now more than $5 trillion a year on digital and information technology. That's a massive number. But if you look at it in perspective, this is a hidden GDP. The GDP of only the US and China are larger than this technology GDP. So we have to focus on it very carefully. Number two, if we look at individual spending on technology, take away the global economics and all this fancy stuff and take away the company stuff and bring it back to a person. In a developed nation like the US, 30 years ago, maybe there wasn't a lot of technology for an individual person to buy, but technology was only about 0.5% to 0.8% of personal spending. Right now, it's up to 8% of personal spending in your life. It's just massive. And an analogy to just give to why we have to think about things much differently. And we're running this global economy now using industrial age measures. And in fact, if we had an automobile and we wanted to turn it into an airplane, we'd have to add new capabilities and instrumentation. If we wanted to turn it into a spacecraft, we have to add even more. And today we're running this global technology digital economy using measures from industrial age. And that has to change. We need new measures to give us the insights into the workings of the way the world is going today. And in fact, that's why all this matters. We have to treat the economy as it is and call it what it is. It's a digital and technology-enabled economy. We're out of the industrial age, we're out of the information age, we're into a new age for the 21st century.
How are broader economic challenges influencing IT, and how should we think about them as we seek to adapt to these new realities?
I think the broad economic challenge is the volatility and speed of the world today. Problem is we're doing this discussion. The world markets are probably moving up and down 1.5% or 2% as they do almost daily. There's this massive volatility out there. And it's happening 24 hours a day, which sounds like a lot. And people talk about 24/7, but you take 24/7 in 24 time zones or so, and the world is a wild place of volatility. There's no way to cope with any of this without technology. There's no way to deal with the transactions. We see this in high frequency trading where nanoseconds make a difference without the underlying digital and information technology. So in fact, the world's economy, its behaviors dictate that we have the need for speed and precision and risk management. There's no solution that would allow it to operate without the fuel of a digital technology. And that's why we're in the state we're in, but that's both the exciting part of it too.
In your paper, you stated that industrial age economics play very little part in the digital era. Can you tell us why?
If there's a change in Caterpillar tractor or an Asian steelmaker, it does have an impact on world markets. But look what happens when Apple introduces a new product, or something happens with IBM or Cisco or one of the technology companies, ripples across the global markets with Google and everybody else. So in fact, the sense and response systems of the world inherently know we're in a digital technology and react far more on the behavior of technology companies than the industrial age companies. And that's just another sign we're in this new economy.
How do you define the relationship between IT spend and the performance of IT, and then the performance of the business in general?
The equation is always about, in this holy grail, it's the input of technology to the outcome. You always have to measure on the input side that you're doing the best you can with technology, and we'll talk about some of those characteristics, I believe, a little later. But the outcomes then in real business terms, and that's connecting the dots. It's understanding your technology cost of goods, your technology outcomes, and what you do on one side and how it shows up on the other side, and how the needs of that outcome side keep changing. And that's the holy grail. There's no fancy math or anything else. It's the thinking, it's the network of creating value with technology.
Moore's law has to a large extent ruled technology adoption and growth, but you believe that's running out of gas. Can you explain why that is?
Yes, Moore's law, the idea of that computing power doubles and costs go down, has been in effect for 50 years or so. And there's a feeling now, and actually there's a wonderful article in Bloomberg about this, where maybe it's running out of gas. Moore himself has said that. And companies now have been getting a lift from Moore's law. It's, hey, you get this in your home on your personal computers or your tablets. You get more power, better, faster, cheaper. But in fact, it looks like in the future, the cost of getting that next better, faster, cheaper is just going to be higher than expected. So you're not going to get that value out of it. And in fact, what that means to companies, it's like surfing a wave. So you're running a company, you're running IT, you keep buying new servers, you buy new stuff, it gives you more power per dollar, and you ride that wave. And a matter of fact, that wave is worth about 6 or 8% a year in improved efficiency. When that wave goes away, the issue is how are companies going to get the next boost in efficiency and effectiveness. It's not going to be from the marketplace and the new technologies. It's going to be from the way they're using technologies, apply it, and match it to the business outcomes they need.
Now, if indeed Moore's Law is done and dusted, how does that change the way we run IT?
If we look at Moore's Law was the underpinnings of what you might call the continental drift in IT efficiency. That things were getting better, faster, and cheaper. And as long as you were on that plate, your business would move along with it. So as the marketplace had better technology with more power for less cost, every company would get that lift. And that might have been worth 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8% a year, improved economic efficiency. And you see this in your phones, you see this in your tablets, you see this in consumer goods too, you see this in the TVs. Now what's happening, and even the inventor of Moore's Law, Moore himself, sees that the next leaps in technology are going to require massive investment. So cost isn't going to go down as fast as power goes up. So in fact, the continental drift of this type that I'm talking about is going to slow down. So this means for companies, they're going to have to be cleverer. They're going to have to be able to get this increased improvement in economic efficiency by adapting and innovating with technology rather than just watching the same technologies improve over time. And that's going to really distinguish the technology leaders, those who are able to keep up the continuous economic improvement without the boost of Moore's Law necessarily, at least the same rate, but to give their businesses increased economic efficiency, effectiveness, and reliability in this digital age. The first signal a CIO should look at is their own efficiency and productivity from year to year. If they're doing the same thing and using the same playbook, but their improvements are slowing down, it's almost like a diet. You're losing weight, you're losing weight, you're losing weight, and you're saying things and you plateau. Time to change your diet, assuming you're still healthy and well. And that's what they have to look at. But that means they need the measures in place. They need their own technology, GPS. They need to be measuring these things to even detect a change. Because they're so slight and so not apparent that they're just not intuitive. You have to manage by the numbers. You have to fly this thing with instruments.
So Howard, tell me, why should every CIO have a focus on the economic value that they're delivering?
And this is the shortest answer I'll give you. And the answer is because they must. The success of technology needs to be measured from a business perspective and not just from a technical perspective. If you just measure from a technical perspective, you're optimizing the technology and not the result. And technology is always about result.
As opposed to just keeping up with the Joneses, right?
That's right. Just because you have the latest, greatest. I always tell my clients that technology is not a fashion statement.
In your paper, you refer to a digital economic tipping point. Are we now at such a tipping point? And what are the signals?
I'm using tipping point to mean the point at which things better take off. So if you look at market conditions over the past 15 years, and you look at the dip in the global markets in 2007, 2008, the market crash sent the world into recession. Companies' knee-jerk reaction was to cut their spendings to lower expenses because revenue was going nowhere, and that's what was going on. Along the things that they cut, by the way, was technology. And what you find, and this is really invisible unless you look at the data, that as people cut their technology investment down, you start to see a lag effect that workforce productivity went down because workforce was not getting the tooling it needed to be as productive as it needed in this tough economy. So people's reflexes were all wrong. But the most interesting point is that we've sort of flatlined. In terms of looking at technology support to the business, the amount of income supported to technology dollar and any kind of measure about technology outcome, they're the same as they were in 2005 and 2006. Our technology performance has flatlined, and companies now are more cautious about investments. The economic future of the world is always in question moment by moment, the dynamics of China and the dollar and all these other things oscillating around. So they're cautious about pumping more technology money in. And what I'm talking about when I talk about a tipping point is I believe that the only thing will break us free right now from this flatline global economy is to embrace digital and technology economics, start to invest in technology heavily to increase productivity and performance for this new age, and that'll break through the barrier of performance that we're exhibiting. and take us into the next level of global performance and economic prosperity, if we wish to call it that. And that's what I mean by the tipping point. It's the point at which we must invest more in technology and not use technology as an expense to be cut, but look at technology as an investment to be made with new rules and new guidelines for a digital economy. We can talk about some of those shortly, but in fact, that's the tipping point. It's the breakthrough of realizing that technology is an investment that has business results, and if we don't have critical mass of investments, we will always just languish at the same level of business performance.
Can you describe the idea that agility is the key aspect that's needed to adapt to this ever-changing global economy?
You'll see, even in the world's big banks, you've seen some of the big banks, the investment banks, their revenue fell off by 25% during the peak of the drop, if that sentence even makes sense. For the maximum drop, 25% downturn in revenue. And you have an expense base for a company. If your expense base for the company doesn't have any kind of downward compressibility, then your cost structure becomes ineffective for your business. Now, with IT today, with the world of the cloud and things like that, organizations need to design their IT economics so it has some level of downward compressibility and upward scalability. And that's what agility is about. And by that I mean they need to take their basic IT cost structure, technology cost structure, which was largely fixed costs in the past, because they own the plants, they own the computing, they own the storage, they own everything out there. They have to say, suppose this drops off and my demand falls off, which is possible. I'm not doing as many transactions, I have less customers, I don't have the revenue to support it. I have to be able to bring that cost base down by some measured amount, and I have to be able to add business back without adding that on linearly. So what companies need to do is to have some kind of elastic cost base in their computing economics to buffer themselves, and again in a measured way, that in cases of revenue decline, the IT economics can move with the business, and revenue expansion, the IT supported. Agility in IT is about elasticity, and to be able to have a measured compressibility of the technology budget and expansion of the budget and up times. And it is not about just fixed and variable cost. It's about the speed of movement of your budgets.
So it's all about the ability to adapt to the speeds and needs of a business.
Right. If this was technology Darwinism, this is survival of the fittest, and it's about adapting to your environment.
You've mentioned that we're now at a juncture where IT could be delivered to a new world and in a new way. Can you elaborate on the idea of tech commons?
Yes, the basic thesis that I have is technology can be delivered to this new world in new ways. So the new way of delivering IT in this new world is going to be through what I call technology commons, just as we've had grazing lands in the past, or just as we've had communes, or just as we've had shareable goods in factories and ways of shipping goods, electric utilities, everything gravitates to the commons. And why is that important? Well, it's important to deliver things into a new world in a new way. It goes back to the concept of agility. If you own everything and demand goes away, you're stuck with the excess capacity. If you have a shareable resource, you can start to spread the capacity across and buffer against each other. We're going to start to see that companies will realize that if they avail themselves of commons, even the smallest bank can compete with the largest bank by having the same scale and capacity they do, but sharing it. And in the notion of agility, the very structure themselves of a common, it's a grazing land for technology, allows you to have the downward compressibility and the upward scalability as many share a same resource and can avail themselves of those capabilities. And that gives companies entirely new economics. It starts to mean that perhaps their data center of the future is no data center at all, and changes the way the world works. When you're in a world where everyone can share the same lowest common denominator resource, then in fact, how do you distinguish yourself? It's through specialization. So the corollary of this, which may sound brutal, is you don't screw up the commons through special interests. So if you have a grazing field of grass and you have one species that requires a special kind of grass, you don't put it in there because the commons is the common, but you put that separately and you specialize in that. So that's what's going to happen. And eventually when everyone is doing the same specialized stuff, the specialized stuff becomes commons itself. So you have this entirely wonderful evolution. And going back to the discussion we even had earlier when we were just talking about adapting to new needs. I mean, if you're going back to Charles Darwin, and this is not to preach the biology, but he doesn't talk about that it's the strongest or the smartest of the species that survives. It's the species that are able to adapt to change. And that's what this is about. It's adapt to changing business environment, global economic environment, and the changing needs of the global skill sets needed to support this. And that's going to determine the success and competitiveness of the nations.
Given the rapid evolution in technology, Which new technologies do you think will have the most impact on IT and the CIO?
Let me start with the role of the CIO first, because that's a foundation and it's pivotal. The role of the CIO really has to change. If you look at the big investment banks of the world, major financial institutions, they all have people they call their chief economists. Something goes a burp in the economy, someone says, here's my chief economist at Morgan Stanley. Well, what happens in your company? Who's your chief technology economist? Technology in a company is not about the latest server, it's not about the latest kind of flash storage or the biggest broadband network. It's managing the inputs and outcomes of technology in a sound economic model that gives the company the resiliency and risk control they need. So I view the CIO of the future as a chief technology economist. That chief technology economist is really determining companies' monetary and risk policy for technology investment, whether that's in a data center or on the shop floor in a process control system. So it's putting this all under one massive envelope of digital and technology economics as a chief economist for the enterprise. But number two, what are the decisions that are made underneath it? They're not all financial. I'm making it sound like it's heavily financial, but it's the deployment models. What goes into the commons? What do we do internally? How do we plan for the future? How are we going to compete? What are the skill sets we need? What are the human people development stuff we need? What do we have to do with security and such? So in fact, in the future, the decision of the CIO has changed. The CIO of the future, I mean, not to push the issue of metrics, but in a technology economy, we have a planet right now, and if you say where you want to go, you have longitude and latitude. And we have GPSs. There's a couple of old adages. I think one says that if you don't know where you are, a map won't help, and if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. I mean, the chief technology economist is going to have to lay down what are the coordinates for the system they're in technology and business terms. Going to have to plot a course to navigate that journey and see that you're on that course and making mid-course corrections, at the same time tracking everybody else's course. We're in a world, this is going to sound strange, you hear about climate change all the time. We've got technology climate change, and companies have got to deal with it. That's the underpinnings. Imagine climate change was faster than anyone has ever calibrated. And you're a trip planner for someone, and they tell you they want to go on vacation 3 years from now in the future. And you tell them to pack a bathing suit, and they get there, they find out this climate change, they really needed skis. Things are just moving around so fast. So the role of the CIO, in some sense, is a trip planner, but that trip is planned on business outcomes, not the technology inputs, and it's the mating of what technologies and deployments will get to the future that the business needs. And the business is allowed to change their plans. So how can they adapt, and then how can they respond to global market conditions and all these things going on? This is not an easy job, and there's no precedent in history for doing it.
So in a sense, they've got to be able to rent the skis as opposed to buy them outright.
That's right, if you think that's one of your risk areas. So the other thing that maybe I've underplayed it, but your question is a good revealing one, it's more than looking at the innovations and technology choices and looking at the deployment models. It's sort of reading the tea leaves and then figuring out what's the right economic model and how do I manage the risks of my choices going forward so I can back out if I have to and change course if I need to.
It seems that every CIO should be measuring their performance and capability economically and functionally. Now, what are the most salient measures of success?
So if it's the charge of the CIO to be measuring their efficiency and effectiveness, and as I said before, measuring their inputs and their outcomes, they have to have this measurement suite to chart what they're doing. And as I said, clearly there are measures they need to deal with, which answer the question, are their technology engines operating efficiently and effectively and all that. But the effective side really crosses over to the world of outcomes. So they really need to have clear business outcome measures. I've said this in general terms before, but if you take a look at business outcome measures, it could be everything from a customer, the impact of technology on customer retention or wallet share or customer satisfaction. You need parallel operations measures. Suppose you're running a bank. What is your cost to handle a deposit in a branch or through a mobile phone? What is your cost to clear a check or process a trade? I mean, these are simple operational measures. Or in the mortgage business, or you're in a factory, what's your cost of goods for technology for an automobile? So you can look at customer measures, you can look at operational measures, and then you can look at product measures. What's your time to market and things like that? But governments are highly digitized too. I mean, the backbones of governments today is interaction with its constituents and whether it's in the taxation plan to motor vehicle licenses to whatever else the government is doing. It's the digitization for that, and that's measuring the service to the people and the government and the performance and the responsiveness and overall risk, even if you were Federal Reserve. So there's a whole suite of things that the CIO must measure, and they have to have those outcome measures in place. For each of those outcome measures, they have to understand the connection with the dots back to the IT input side. They have to put in place the underlying IT foundation to give them the risk profile, the security, and the elasticity they need. They need to make their technology choices underneath this, whether it's the commons or in-house. They need to build for the future by planning for the needed skill sets. They need to look at all this stuff globally. Sounds like a daunting task.
It sounds like the CIO needs a juxtaposition of skills and a deep insight into the metrics that's needed to capture the performance of all the different departments of the business.
Yeah, the choice of the word juxtaposition is exactly right. There are many disciplines involved. And your question sort of said it yourself. Being a CIO today is not just making the technology choices. It's really making the business choices, and that's multidisciplinary, lots of different facets to consider. I mean, the CIO is going to be making technical choices in the context of business choices. The CIO is going to be making the context of technology investments in terms of business outcomes. It's going to be looking at this in the dimensions of what it does to company performance, whether it's revenue, time to market of the customers, or all the kinds of things I've listed. At the same time, the technology is evolving underneath it. At the same time, the global economy is changing on top of it. Same time, the needed skill sets to get to the future are there. And at the same time, you need different instruments to calibrate where you're going because the whole world is changing and the old measures aren't working. So the CIO faces somewhat of a daunting task, but that's the challenge. So it means national leaders, policymakers, and everybody else has to be cognizant that technology affects not only our companies, not only affects the running of the government, but everybody's single life. It pervades healthcare, education, and everything else. And that's the challenge of the future. It's managing the transition from industrial age to information age to a digital economy in uncharted space with no latitude or longitude, where no one knows what the rules are. So it's quite a challenge that's out there. And again, it goes everything from the CIO to the world's leaders, to the G8, to the G20, to understand how this works and to do this to the benefit of mankind and whatever is going to come next.
Dr. Rubin, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us and explaining the importance of IT digital economics.